Hey, I'm Caleb from YouCanMakeThisToo. Today I'm going to be talking about the proper way to attach a tabletop to account for wood movement. I've got 6 different techniques I'm going to go over. Now let me show you how you can make this too. It may seem silly, but I think the right place to start with is why. Why do we have to bother accounting for wood movement? Well, wood's going to move. It just happens, and it's an extremely powerful force. They used to use wood to split stone by finding a crack or drilling a hole, drawing out a piece of wood, putting it in there, putting a water drip on it, and the capillary of the action of the wood would draw the water, expand it, and split stone. Point being, when wood moves, nothing's going to stop it, and that force has to go somewhere. If you haven't accounted for that, then that force is probably going to wreck your piece. So how do we stop that? One obvious answer would be, don't let your wood get wet. We finish it, isn't that going to be a moisture barrier? Yes and no, that's going to prevent your drinks and stuff from staining the wood or quick absorption. However, there isn't really an impermeable finish, and just the humidity in the air and the change in the humidity, the ambient humidity between summer and winter is going to cause your wood to move. Some woods are more stable. Cherry's a very stable wood, and some climates are very stable. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. We see a good bit of variation in our humidity between summer and winter, so things can move a lot. But places where the climate is more stable throughout the year, you're going to see less change, so there won't be as much of an issue. Here's my little table mock-up. We've got boards running that way, a leg, and some aprons. On most tables, this would be the short side, this would be the long side. However, you can have boards running across the width of the table. That's fine, you just have to account for it. Now, if wood movement isn't accounted for, what are we going to see happen here? Well, when it expands, you probably aren't going to see too much because wood's fairly flexible. So even if we screwed right through here, glued these down, pocket screwed them, wood's fairly flexible, so it's probably going to be able to account for things getting pushed, although you might see failure at like your apron joints or just the fasteners or glue seams busting. Now, what's most common that we see is when the wood shrinks in summer. If everything's locked in, we're going to find points of failure. So any grain that's weak, or if you have bad glue seams, those are going to start splitting. I think we've all seen tabletops that had splits running down it or cracks that had closed because the wood got dry, so it split, but then the moisture came back and it kind of closed, but you can tell that there was a crack there. Wood movement is a topic all its own. Many books have been written about it, but I'm just going to say these are plain sawn boards. You can see that because the grain goes in arches and also these cathedrals on the face, and they're going to expand and contract across their width. This is a rift sawn board because the grain's about a 45, so this is going to have a fairly balanced movement between its width and thickness. One of the reasons a lot of people like to use quarter sawn lumber, where the grain is pretty much, vertical or slightly off vertical, is because most of the expansion here is going to happen across its thickness if it's arranged this way, not across its width, which makes it very stable, so it's not going to move near as much. So people like to use quarter sawn on panels, tabletops, etc. But it tends to be harder to get and more expensive. And the difference in grain orientation is why we have issues with certain types of furniture. Tabletops is where it often comes in because we normally have grain running perpendicular to each other. This tabletop is going to want to expand across its width, whereas this is running longwise, and boards don't get longer. They either expand across their width or their thickness. This is square, so it'd be either way. Now imagine if instead of having an apron running this way, we had a really wide board like this and took a slice off of it. Well, if it was the same species, it would expand at the same rate of the top, so there'd be no problems. But nobody builds tables that way. Odds are your apron probably looks more like this than like a square, so your apron is going to expand this way, which isn't going to interfere with the top. It's also very narrow, so the amount of expansion isn't going to be an issue. Once we start piling those widths together, that's where we're going to see an issue. Most tabletops, at the most, you may be a 1/4 inch, more likely you're talking around an 1/8 or 3/16, which is very easy to account for unless you glue it to your base, screw it down, or lock it down. I've got a variety of fasteners here, and so long as we remember that the wood's going to move across its width, we're not going to have any issues securing this if we account for it. These are Z-clips. I've used these in quite a few of my projects and videos, and you normally either use a biscuit joiner as a quick way to make a saw slot, or you can rip this down the table saw before you install it to have a groove to fit it into. So you want to make sure that groove is wider than the hardware, so that way it can move as the wood moves. You can see it has a pretty good size protrusion. That's not just so you get a good bite, though you do want to get a good bite. It's also so you probably don't want to only secure your table on the end. Well, that's the nice thing about Z-clips, is they're really easy to put here because they're long enough that you can set them about halfway, and then they have room to move in and out of the side aprons. Figure eights have been around for a long time and they're really common. I don't like them. The idea is you'll drill a small countersink hole so that way this sits flush, obviously on the underside, but then you couldn't see. You can screw that through your apron and then screw the other side on the top, so it'd really look more like that. Well, it was a pretty genius move, but my issue is these can only move radially because they swing around a pivot point. And while that is going to account for some movement, and you really don't have a whole lot of movement in wood, wood doesn't move radially, it moves laterally. So I'm just not as comfortable with these. Another downside is you can't install it this way on your apron because there's no way to screw both sides. So you really can't use figure eights on the long side of your tabletop. And I want to secure my tabletop not just at the short side, but also on the long sides most likely. So these aren't a good option. Now there is an alternative. Izzy Swan with Fast Cap make a product called the skirt washer that'll link below, and one hole's round, the other is elongated, so that way you have an elongated slot for your screw to move in to account for wood movement. Those would be cool. A shop-made solution that does the same thing basically as a Z-clip is what we call a button, and same idea, you just want to make sure your slot is wider so it slides, and over here goes in and out. Size it accordingly. This isn't really a great size. It's just what I whipped up as a demonstration. Now to cut your groove, a domino works great, or you can just use a router. You probably want to size your tenon here to fit whatever router bit you have to make it easy. Cut a slot on your aprons, stick it in there, and screw it in. You can get fancier with this design. Some folks like to do a relief cut and then have two screw holes. The rear screw hole will secure it to the tabletop, and then when you have that relief cut, you put a second screw in that pulls it together to squeeze it down. I like to keep it simple, but you can get as fancy as you want. A note on making buttons. It's very tempting when you have your board because you're basically going to want to make a long dado. It's easiest to make these in bulk. So you'll run a dado either with a circular saw table saw or router table. Make all your marks, drill all your holes, and then cut out all your buttons so they'd be arranged like this. The problem is, as you can see the way the grain's going, it's going to snap really easy because you have a weak point that would be right along the grain where things are going to snap. And trust me, they snap. I've made that mistake. So what you actually want to do is run this along the end grain, and use a pretty solid wood. This is maple. If you do it like this, now the grain is running along the length instead of across the weak point, and these have a better chance of not snapping off as you tighten them down. Now there's a good chance you saw these screws and bolts with inserts and was thinking to yourself, wait, I thought you said don't screw things down. Well, you can, you just can't screw them down in such a way that you lock it and it can't move. Now we could certainly screw through this apron into that wood. The problem is if we just drill a pilot or just screw right through it, now we're locking the wood. But if we drilled or filed an elongated hole, well now this screw is able to move as the top moves. Same here. Now it can move in that hole and you really don't have as much of a problem because the tabletop is allowed to move. Now you probably don't want to do that on an apron because you don't have the material there and you're going to make your member too weak. Well, if you've used reinforcing blocks in your corner, something like this, well now you probably have the material and you could even size your reinforcement to fit an elongated hole and put your screw through that where it can move. Now if you go with this, you probably don't want to use a countersunk head. That's just what I had on hand. You don't want to use a pan head. Size your hole just to fit the threads so that it's not biting and it's only biting in the wood. Use a washer and just let it float on top. Same thing works with your bolt and insert. I prefer bolts and inserts just because they last a lot longer. So if you're ever going to take this in and out, wood strips out easy. The issue with using an insert and a bolt comes to alignment. You have to nail your position. The advantage of using a screw is you can just get everything set, drive your screw in, and it's fine. Whereas when you set your insert, you're going to have to worry about transferring your holes accurately. Now, in most situations, one of these hardware is going to be the easiest, and you can hide any of this hardware inside the apron. Let's say you have a design where you don't have an apron like this, like I did my modern dining table that had the X base. I drilled holes through it and used inserts and bolts to secure the base to the top of that, because any hardware would have been exposed and ruined the aesthetic of it. If you feel like I've missed anything, please drop a comment. Let me know what that is so I can learn and everyone else can learn along too. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something or at least entertained. Please let me know what you're working on. I love to hear what you guys are working on. And until next time, make time to make something.